What's up, guys? In our last couple of videos, we went ahead and got this transmission all buttoned up. This is our TH400 for the Camaro. So if you missed that, definitely go check it out. Today we're going to be getting it installed, getting a shifter, oil cooler, converter, a couple things like that hooked up. So we'll go ahead and get started on all that. First things first, before we take it out to the car and install it, we need to do a couple things here. I need to throw those tail housing bolts in real quick. I'll go ahead and do that. We have our knuckle needs to be installed back here, and also we need to take care of this bolt for our dipstick. So I think in the last video I said that I had that bracket that came down off the back of the cylinder heads and dropped down, that way we could mount it there. I'm not going to be using that. Actually, it didn't fit very well for me. So what I'm going to be using instead is these easy locks. So I'll go ahead and take one out of the pack so you can see it. But if you've ever seen a helicoil before, it's kind of similar. So let me pull one out real quick and I'll show you. Alright, so here's our bracket that I showed in the last video. I said we were going to use it to tie the dipstick up. How it works is it bolts on the back of the cylinder head right here, comes out and drops down, and then we can run our bolt in. This is a cheap one. I didn't like how it fit up, so we're not going to use it. Instead, we're going to use these thread inserts. So if you ever used a helicoil, it's more of a spring type that goes down in there, whereas this is more of a insert itself. So if you look, it's got threads on the outside, threads on the inside. These are 1/2 13 threads on the outside and 3/8 16 on the inside. And if you look, to drill and tap a 1/2 13 hole, I think you need to drill it out to like 420 or something like that. And if we measure the holes in the bell housing already, they're like 405 or 415. So we're pretty close on size already, so I went with these ones. Was drilled out a couple thousandths bigger, and then run a 1/2 13 tap through there, and then we should be able to screw this in. You can see it's got slots for a screwdriver to push it in, and then we should just be able to run a 3/8 bolt all the way through our dipstick and tighten it down on those inside threads. So I'll go ahead and drill and tap that out, and we'll come back and see how it looks. Alright, we went ahead and got our knuckle put on. We got our tail housing bolts put on and torqued down to 20 foot-pounds. And then moving over to our dipstick, we got that insert put in, and we should have a 3/8 bolt screwed in to hold it in place. It's nice and rigid, ain't going anywhere. So we're ready to go there. Now we'll go ahead and take this out to the car and get ready to start installing it. Alright, before we install the transmission, I just want to show you the shifter real quick and how I got it mounted up. As you can see, here's our Motion RACEWORKS operator shifter, and it's mounted in there nice and solid. Doesn't wiggle around, so we're good to go there. So you can see I have the dash sitting in here. It's not bolted up, it's just sitting in place, because I also set the center console and trim in here just to make sure this thing would fit underneath of it nicely, and it just barely fit. So one thing to note, if you are running the CO2 kit on this shifter in the 5th gen Camaro, it will not fit under the stock center console and trim. You'll have to modify it or do something. I'm not running it, so I got it to fit in here nicely. I didn't really have to cut too much. I had to trim a little bit of the back trim right here, just so it didn't rub on the back of the shifter. But other than that, we are good to go. The shifter cable runs underneath the dash and out a hole in the front of the trans tunnel, so we're good there. And then my mount, I just made a 1/8 inch piece of plate right here. There was already 4 holes here from the old shifter, so I just went ahead and rib nutted those, bolted into place, and then I just drilled and rib nutted 4 holes right there for the feet of the shifter to mount to, so we're good to go there. One thing I did do is there's a big hole under here where the old shifter went through. I went ahead and put some of this trim around the lip of that hole right there before I bolted it down, and my thoughts on that were to, one, help it seal it up a little bit better, and also to reduce any metal on metal so that way it didn't make any noise. And as you can hear, it's on there pretty solid, so I'm happy with that. So I'll go ahead and show you guys the cross member mount for the transmission before we put it in, and then we'll go ahead and get to setting it up. Here's what that rubber trim underneath looks like. And here's our shifter with the center console and trim piece installed. As you can see, fits nice and clean right there. I did have to take the little gauge pods out right here, which no big deal. I wasn't really planning on using them anyways. So I think what I'm going to do in the future is put a piece of sheet metal back here, and then I go ahead and mount 2 individual gauge pods right there. I think it'll work better for what I'm doing, and I think it'll look pretty nice also. I did also have to take out the traction control button and the little car charger port. No big deal, I wasn't planning on using those either. And then the only thing I had to do to make this thing fit was notch out the back trim just ever so slightly right there. Still needs cleaned up a little bit. I just want to make sure it works. So there's that right there. And the only other thing I think I'm going to do in the future is make a little trim piece to sit in here. As you can see, there's lots of room right there. So maybe in the future we'll go ahead and 3D print something or something like that to make that work. But there it is, all mounted up and ready to go. Alright, so here's our transmission cross member right here. This is a G-force cross member. I'll put the part number in right here. It is specifically made for a Turbo 400 going into a 5th gen Camaro, so that should make this install nice and easy. So this side will be the top facing the car, and then in the bottom right here we'll just run our 2 bolts through there into our transmission mount. So we'll be good to go there. It didn't come with the 4 bolts right here to mount to the car, so I did have to run out and get some M10 by, I believe I got 20 or 24 millimeter length bolts. So we're good for the 4 holes here. So it should make this thing super nice and easy to install into the car. So we'll go ahead and take it out, get the transmission lift up, and get it bolted into place. Alright, here we are. We're underneath the car. As you can see, the transmission's up and in. Sorry I didn't film too much of it. I had a buddy come over and we just knocked this out real quick, getting it in. But it is in. You can see we have our new cross member right here. It's bolted into the mount right there. And we have our 4 bolts right there holding it into place. So we're good to go there. I did run into one issue while installing it, so let me reposition and I'll show you guys that real quick. So the one issue I had when installing this transmission was with our rife sensor block. If you remember in the last video, we bolted our bracket up in these 2 holes right here, and the sensor sat up top, right up in here. If you'll notice, here's the bracket set in there just like this. And I actually have this transmission pushed this way towards the driver's side a little bit right now, just so it's a little easier to get into. But whenever this thing's all centered up, the sensor block does not fit up here in the trans tunnel. There's not enough room. It gets in the way. I tried a couple times moving this bracket around to various locations, seeing if I could get it somewhere where I wanted. I really wanted to keep the sensor block attached to the transmission. That way in the future, whenever we have to pull this transmission out, everything's all connected. However, I just couldn't find a good way to do it. I laid here for a good hour, hour and a half, just trying different variations, trying to get the sensor block to fit somewhere on the transmission. I thought about putting the bracket upside down like this, and then having our sensor block right here. However, it does hang down a little bit past the frame rails. I don't want to do that. And also, it's just hard to get the lines routed the way I wanted them to. Alright, we're back. It's actually a day and a half later. I tried to put this thing absolutely anywhere else than right here. I tried putting it back here, moving it up a little farther, doing it right here, and I just couldn't get it anywhere where it worked better than it does right here. So I think we're going to rock it for now. Not sure how I feel about it. We might move it later on. But for now, we're going to see how it works. As you can see, I got the old fuel lines out of the way, so that's all gone. This thing does sit above the frame rails right here, but just barely. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the bracket back off, take it into work, put it on the press brake, and try and bend it in a little more. That way, instead of it sitting like this, it'll sit more like this. That should help us get it even higher above the frame rails and also make it a little easier to route everything. You can see we have our 2 lines coming straight down right here, connecting to our sensors. We still have tons of room to get our plug in and out whenever that goes in. And then our temp sensor line runs up over top of the pan, drops down around the backside and 90s into the sensor. So we're good to go there. And then our cooler lines will just go straight to the frame rail right here, and then it can run all the way back behind it. So we'll connect it right here, run it all the way down. Alright, and here we have everything installed with our bracket bent. As you can see here, we tilted it more this way. It was at about a 25-degree angle to start with, and I ended up bending it to like a 65-degree angle. So we went like an extra 40 degrees. And you can see here, we just take this wrench. It sits, an inch and a half probably above the frame rails now. So we're good to go there. So now everything's hooked up and good to go here. So now we can go ahead and move on to connecting our shifter cable. To attach our shifter cable to our shifter, it's pretty easy. First, we're going to go ahead and put the shifter in the park position, which we are right there. Next, you're going to have this little piece they call it a dog bone. There's a very tiny screw that goes in the middle that holds it in place, and it goes right there. So we're going to go ahead and take it out, and once we take it out, you can see there's two holes, a top and a bottom. We want to go ahead and line the end of the shifter cable up with the bottom hole and put our pin through. You can see the pin in there, the little shiny piece in the hole. You want to make sure it's in the bottom one and not the top one. The top one is for our CO2 air shifter. We're not going to be using that, but make sure the shifter cable goes in the bottom hole. After that's done, we can go ahead and put our dog bone piece back in. Oh, dropped it. I'll have to go find it. But you can put the dog bone shifter back in right there, and make sure you put the little tiny screw in and tighten it down. And then there's a little bracket right there on the end. A screw goes through it. You're going to tighten it down right there. Once we have both those tightened down and in place, we can go ahead and put the shifter in the neutral position, and then we'll go ahead and climb underneath the car and go do that side. Moving down to the bottom side of our shifter cable, you can see it comes down on this side of the transmission and wraps around right here. One thing you want to make sure this cable is, one, there's no sharp bends or kinks in it anywhere. So this bend right here is a nice gradual bend all the way around, so we're good to go there. Also, this thing has some movement, as you can see, to bend and flex as it needs to, so we're good to go there. Moving around to our bracket right here, our cable runs through the bracket, and then we have a jam nut on each side right here. So we're going to go ahead and snug those down, and then we'll go ahead and move over to where it connects to our shifter gear. Moving down here, we have our shifter lever itself. If you remember, we put the shifter in neutral when we were up top, so we want to go ahead and put this in neutral also. It's all the way forward right now, which means it's in park. So if we move it down one click, that'll be reverse right there, and down one more will be neutral, and then after that we have first, second, and third. We want to go ahead and adjust this pin on the end. It's threaded, so you can spin it in and out. So we want to adjust this to where it fits nicely into hole A right here. As you can see, I've already done it. Fits in nice and smooth right there. Now that we have that done, we want to go ahead and go through and check every gear just like this to make sure it fits nicely in the hole. That way we make sure that our shifter actually matches up with our lever right here. So we're going to go ahead and move this down one. Now we're in first gear here. We'll go ahead up to the shifter itself, shift it into first gear, and this pin should slide nicely into hole A once again. So we'll go ahead and check all the gears: park, reverse, neutral, first, second, third. Make sure everything's good there. I already went ahead and did that, so we can go ahead and fix this in place for good. And then we just have a cotter pin that we need to put it through on this side right here. And that's all there is to that. Now that we have our shifter cable done, we go ahead and move on to installing our remote drain for the transmission catch can. So here we are underneath the passenger side wheel well, and as you can see right there, we have our catch can for our transmission. There we have our 1/4 inch push to connect fitting, and we just have some lines stuck on it right there. So our engine catch can is going to drop down through right here, and we're going to have another one of these mounted up right there. So you'll be able to twist it. All your catch can for the engine oil will drain out right here. So we need to put the transmission one somewhere close to where the engine one is. So I think what we're going to do is mount this one horizontally right here. We'll just drill and install a rib nut right there. And that way you can put a bucket or some sort of container underneath. Open up this one, and catch both of them at the same time. So we're going to be good to go there. I would like to mount both of them vertically right next to each other. However, this needs to sit lower than the transmission catch can. And if you'll see, it's pretty much straight in line if we do it right here. So it needs to be a little bit lower like this. So that's why I think we're going to mount it just like this. And then we'll run our push connect line right there, connect it in. This sits about 3/4 of an inch lower than our drain on the catch can right there. So we'll have a nice downhill stream for our transmission fluid to get out of this drain. That way it's not sitting up here and it doesn't drain very well or at all. So we're going to go ahead and put it right here, drill and rib nut it, and then we'll come back when this is installed. Alright, so I'm getting ready to drill and install a rib nut for a catch can drain right here, and I want to talk about rib nuts real quick. I know I've done a lot of them on this car so far, but I really haven't showed how I do it. There's a lot of different ways to do it, and some people don't even know what a rib nut is. So first, what is a rib nut? That is a rib nut right there. It looks pretty similar to a standard rivet, so you'll drill your hole in your piece of sheet metal, pop this thing through, crimp it down just like a standard rivet. The only difference is it has threads on the inside right here, so you can pop it through a piece of sheet metal, crimp it down, and it'll leave you with a nice set of threads on your sheet metal. So there's different ways you can install these. One of the most common things I see people do is a tool like this. So you'll have a thread that sticks out right here, screw your little rib nut on, put it through, squeeze it, that'll crimp it, and then you can unscrew the tool like this, take it out, and you have your rib nut set. There's also one, I don't have one here, but it's like almost like a big set of bolt cutters, but it has this on the end. So you'll thread your rib nut on the end, squeeze it like a set of bolt cutters, and then take it out like that. Both these work fine. However, the way I prefer to use it are these little tools right here. As you can see, this is much smaller than that, so this is easier to get into tight spaces. I personally like this way better. It does take a little bit of feel to get used to. However, it's not rocket science. It's fairly easy. So how this works is you have two pieces. You have a bolt, and that's another good thing about this. If you pull the threads on the bolt or snap it in half or whatever, no big deal. Just run down to the hardware store, get a new bolt. These actually came with Allen head bolts, and you can tell somewhere along the way I snapped it because I had to replace it with this little hex head bolt. No big deal. So we have our bolt, and then we have our little setting die right here. As long as this thing's good, you just go get another bolt and you're good to go. So how this works is we'll put the bolt inside the little die like that. We'll take our rib nut, screw it into place, just like that. We'll drill the hole in our sheet metal, pop this thing in. We'll grab our little die with a wrench right here, and then we'll put a socket on the little hex head, tighten our socket down. It'll pull these little crimping lines right here, squeeze it in like this, and then after it's crimped, you can just go ahead and unscrew the little tool, take it off, and then you have a crimped rib nut. Like I said, personal preference, there's nothing wrong with these ones. I just like using this one a little bit better for tight areas, especially like anything under dash or anything like that. These are way better in my opinion. I bought a whole set of these years ago on Amazon. Here's the set. You can tell it goes all the way from M3 to M10, and on the standard size I think it goes from 632 to 3/8. I also have a 1/2-13 one laying around somewhere. But there's our little drilling guide. So it tells you what size to drill for each. So M5 we're going to drill a 7mm hole, or whatever standard size closest. I don't have metric drills. I just go whatever standard size is the closest. So we'll go ahead and put those in. I also always try and buy these little rib nuts, the stainless steel version. They do have a steel one and an aluminum one. I think the stainless steel ones are the best. They just last the longest, and the threads are a little stronger than the aluminum ones. So we're good to go there. So I'll go ahead, drill it, install the rib nut, and then we should be good to go to pull down our little drain. And there we have it. Now we have our little rib nut set into place there. We can just take our bracket and screw it right in. Just like that. Like I said, I know a lot of people either don't like or aren't really aware of this style option to set the rib nut, but I really like it in tight places like this, or especially, like I said, even under dash work, or if you're in the engine bay, it's real tight. You can get this in pretty much anywhere. And if you can get a wrench and a ratchet in, you're good to go. So we got that in place, so we're good to go there. Now we can go ahead and put together the drain and connect it to the catch can. And there we have it. There's our remote drain right there, all fitted up. You can see our line comes right there, running from the bottom of the catch can right there. So we're good to go there. Super happy with that. So that one's there. Our other one will be right there where that hole is. So we'll have both of them in the same spot. Real easy to get to in the passenger side fender right here. And nice and out of the way. Next we're going to move on to our transmission cooler. So here's our trans cooler right here. This is the Rally Performance. Part number is 13700. and there's the dimensions of it right there. This is the electrical remote cooler. So we got our fan right there, and we have our nice mounting brackets on the side. We'll flip it over. There's our radiator right there. This thing is a 16 pass-through oil cooler. So we're gonna try this thing out, see how it does. And then for our line kit, normally I only buy Frigola lines and fittings. I think they're top of the line, the best you can get. However, I've been seeing a lot of good reviews for this Evil Energy stuff, and I figured this was the perfect time to try one of these kits out. So they make these kits in everything from -6AN to -12, and they might even make them bigger and smaller, I'm not sure, but they definitely make -6 to -12. And this kit is a fraction of the price of if you were to buy everything separately from Frigola. So we'll see how it does. What the kit comes with is we have 20 feet of PTFE line. It comes with 2 of our little hose clamps to secure the hoses under the car. And then we have 4 straight fittings, 2 45s, 2 90s, and 2 180 degrees. And it even comes with the little install tool. So we'll try this out, see how it does. So we'll go ahead and go over to the car right now, and if you'll notice here in a moment, the car is drastically different from the last time you saw it, and we'll go look at that. So as you can see, it looks very different back here than how it did before. I went ahead and pulled the back bumper off, dropped the whole rear subframe, so there it is right there, and pulled the rear fuel tank. The reason I did this is because we're going to be running a trunk mounted fuel cell, so I decided to mount the oil cooler where the factory fuel tank was. And to do that, I needed to drop the subframe a little bit. And while I was back here, I just figured I'd take the whole thing out. In the future, we will be doing videos on the rear end. I think I'm going to do a solid rear axle. So we'll get rid of all this and do a nice solid axle in the back. And there's also a good bit of body work to do on the back. The trunk floor is starting to rust through a little bit, and the driver's side fender well also needs some touch up. So we'll do videos on that in the future. But for now, we got everything dropped out. I'm going to go underneath the car and show you what we'll be working with right now. So here we are back underneath the car. As you can see, all the work we have to do back there in the future on the trunk. Not worried about that today. We're just worried about right here. So this is where the factory fuel tank used to sit. And if you'll notice, there's a nice cut right around there. This is a pretty common thing to do on the 5th gen Camaros. What guys will do is they'll need to replace the fuel pump, or they'll want to put a bigger one in, and instead of dropping the tank and doing it that way, they'll cut what they call a trap door in the floor right here, fold the metal up, and then they'll go ahead and replace the pump that way. We don't have the tank here anymore, and we want to put our cooler right in here somewhere, so we're going to go ahead and weld that up. And then we should be able to mount our cooler right there. I did look online, and I think if we put our cooler over here, we should miss all of our suspension and rear end components. It's hard to tell for sure, obviously, without having everything here to mock up and try out, but we're gonna go ahead and mount it up to go over there, and if we need to move it a little bit slightly in the future, we always can, but we're gonna go ahead and do that. So I'm gonna go ahead and clean all this up, weld the trap door shut, and then we should be able to come back and start mounting up our oil cooler. Alright, so as you can see, I went ahead and got the cooler all installed. To do that, I started off by welding this trap door shut right here. Most of the welds are above the cooler, so you can't really see it. However, you can see a little bit here and here. They're not my best welds, but we're going to call them good enough. I'm happy with them. It was kind of hard to weld this thin stuff, but we got it, and it doesn't look too bad. So I got that done. I left this hole open right here just so we could run our wires through it. I'm going to go ahead and order a grommet and mount it from the top side so we can punch a little hole in it, and we can run all of our wires up through, and it'll actually work out really well because our fuse and relays are going to sit right around here somewhere on the inside of the car, right behind the passenger seat. So it'll be real nice and easy to run all our wires up through this grommet and then straight over, and then we'll be good to go there. So I went ahead and painted and primed everything, so that doesn't look too bad. I'm happy with that. And then I got the cooler mounted. I ended up going with 1-inch spacers in between the floor and the cooler. And as you can see, my hand fits in there easily. So this fan's actually set up for a pulling configuration. If you want to switch it and use it as a pushing fan, it's not too hard to do. All you do is flip the fan around and change the polarity on the 2 wires. We're going to leave it set up as a puller. I think it's going to work best for this scenario. We can always change it if we need to, but we're going to leave it for now. And then when I mounted this cooler up, I wanted to get it this way as far as possible, just because I do have a rear suspension component that goes right through here, and I wanted to make sure I cleared it. However, in doing so, I think I went a little too far this way, and now I'm a little worried about our drive shaft clearance coming through here. I think it should clear both just fine right where it is, but it's going to be pretty close. So we'll see how it looks whenever we get everything else installed. Worst case scenario, we'll shift it this way. I mean, we got another probably 2 inches this way, we can shift it and be all right. I think it'll work here, but we'll just have to see. Maybe we'll have to shift in the future, I don't know yet. But we're gonna call it good for now. The only other different thing I wanted to talk about was originally I had this cooler mounted 180 degrees rotated, and my fittings were right here. So my original goal was to put two 90-degree fittings here, and then run the line down, out, and then run it this way to the transmission. After looking at it a little bit, I ended up rotating it 180 degrees to where it is now. So now my fittings are over here. And the reason I did that is because I think now it's better to run these 180 degree fittings on this side, and then I can just run the line right here straight, angle it down slightly, and go straight to the transmission. I think it'll be a lot cleaner doing it this way than it would be to do 90s on this side. I still have a 90 on that side, but just because I was using it to mock everything up and see what I wanted to do. But we're going to use these 180s. So I'll go ahead and pull this one off, and then we'll go ahead and start installing the lines. Alright, now to start assembling our lines, we have our -6 PTFE hose right here and our PTFE fitting. There's a difference between PTFE fittings and hose and AN. So you need to make sure that you have the correct fittings and the correct hose. And the difference is, so we have our little nut right here. And then on a PTFE, you have an extra piece right here. This is called an olive. On an AN line, you won't have this. It'll just be these two pieces. And this part right here will look a little different. So we have our three pieces. We have our olive, our fitting, and our nut. So we're going to start off by taking our nut, sliding it onto the hose, just like that. Next, we need to take our olive. And if you'll see, this side has a little bit of taper to it. And if you look in there, I don't know if you can see that or not, but there's a little lip. So we need to put this in the end of our line right here, and it needs to be in between the black and the white right there. And we need to push it in all the way until the little white part banks up against that lip inside there. And then once we get our little olive started in there like that, we can take our install tool, put it in there, flip it upside down, and we'll just hit it on the table just like this until we get that thing fully set. Next, all we're going to do is take our fitting, and I just sprayed this with a little WD-40 so it goes in a little bit easier. And we're going to set it down in place just like that. And then we'll take our nut and slide it up, start it on, just like that. And then now we'll go ahead and take us over to the vise and tighten it down. Alright, so we're grabbing our line and fitting in the vise right here, and they do make a set of like magnetic aluminum jaws to hold them in. I have a set, but I don't know where they're at, so we just threw a shop rag in the vise just to keep from scratching it up. It doesn't really matter too much. You don't need to clamp this down too tight anyways, because you can actually bend or crush the little nut in here. So just something light. I just have a rag in here, and then we're going to take an AN wrench and tighten this down, except for I am missing the one size of AN wrench that I need too. It's always how it goes. So we're going to use these Knipex pliers wrenches, and I have these little plastic things that go on the jaws. So we'll just grab it like that and tighten it down all the way. And just like that, we'll pop it out of the vise. And there we have our fitting fully installed. So now we can go ahead and install this side onto the cooler, figure out where we want to cut our line, and then we'll cut it and put the fitting on the other end. Alright, so we took our line out to the car, we screwed this side into the oil cooler, and then ran our other side to the transmission, and I determined that I want to put a 45-degree fitting right there. So we need to cut this line. Lots of people do it lots of different ways. The easiest way I've found to do it is we put a piece of tape on there, and we want to cut it right there. You want to make sure your tape goes on both sides, and you cut it somewhere in the middle of the tape, just like that. And then guys will use different cutters and things like that to cut it. I just use an angle grinder with a cutoff wheel. So we're going to grab that real quick, and we're going to cut right on that line right there. And then we want to make sure we grab the air hose and blow the line out real well, make sure none of that stuff got in the lines and is going to get in our cooler or our transmission. Alright, so here we have both of our lines connected to the transmission right there, and they snake down and go all the way down right there to our oil cooler. Don't mind these lines. I know they're hanging down right now and they look too long, but I'm going to show you how we're going to fix that here in a second, and they're actually not too long. They just look like it right here. So we'll go ahead and tie those up next. Alright, I did do a 90-degree fitting on this side of the trans cooler, and I did that because we want it to wrap around right here, and we'll zip tie the two together right here where my hand is. And I just think it'll be a little bit cleaner this way. So we have our 180-degree fitting right there and our 90, and when everything gets tightened up, it'll go right there just like that. Zip tie these two together, and then we'll run our clamps along the frame to secure everything in place. So let's go ahead and do that now. So we're going to go ahead and use these little line clamps to run everything nice and clean along the frame rails and tie everything up, that way it's not hanging down. Alright, and there we have everything tied up. Running down right there. Runs up. And then you got your split right there. So everything connects real nice. It goes down. I do need to get one more clip to go right here. It is a little loose. I put the two on. I'll just order a third one tonight whenever I order that grommet. It goes right there. And wraps up into the transmission. Just like that. The last thing we're going to do is go ahead and install our torque converter here. This is the Jake's 258mm billet torque converter for the Turbo 400. So we're going to go ahead and install it. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to pop this cap off right here, and we're going to put about half a quart of transmission fluid in there. We need to do that to prime the converter. That way it's got transmission fluid in it whenever we go to start it up. So I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick, and then we'll go out to the car and install it. Alright, we got some fluid in our converter and we're ready to install it. One thing I'm going to talk about first though is the 3-click rule. You'll hear some guys say, oh, you hear 3 clicks, the converter's fully seated, you're good to go. While that is kind of true, it can be misleading. You will hear 3 clicks to get it into place. It'll be this spline right here clicking in, this one, and then your pump seal right there. However, the only way to truly know that it's fully seated is to measure it. So I do use the 3-click rule to kind of gauge where I'm at. However, afterwards, I do go back and measure it. So we'll see if we can't get it filmed, putting the converter in. You'll hear those clicks. But then, like I said, we're going to measure it afterwards. So now that we have our torque converter installed, the only way to really check it and make sure it's fully seated is we need to measure from this pad right here to the end of the bell housing right here. So how we're going to do that is I'm going to lay a straight edge all the way across right here, and then I'll take a set of calipers, measure from the straight edge down to this pad. I'm not going to show it on camera. I already checked it. It's just kind of hard to measure and hold the camera at the same time. But all Turbo 400 should be 1 3/16 inches, and they say it's plus or minus 50 thousandths. I measured it and ended up getting 1.140. So we're supposed to be 1.187 plus or minus 50. I got 1.140, so we're good to go there. Alright guys, and there we have it. The transmission is installed and done. The only thing we have left to do transmission wise is a little bit of wiring. We'll save that for a future date after we get the engine in and we go to wire everything up all at once. But other than that, everything's done. I did order a couple more of those PTFE line clamps, so we'll add 1 or 2 more down there, hold that line a little bit more secure. I also went ahead and ordered the grommet for the hole in the back, so we'll run all our wires through that and we'll be good there. But other than that, we are done. The next video, we'll go ahead and get the engine installed and start working on our front accessories, our radiator, fans, and a couple things like that. Now, deer season's getting ready to start. It's fall. Holidays are around the corner, so I don't know how much time I'll get to work on this the next couple months. So videos might be a little slow coming out until the spring. But we'll get there. We'll keep working on it. And thank you guys for watching, as always, and we'll see you next time.